All right, so thanks everybody for being here. I'm Samantha Gibbs. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Wildlife Health Office, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on New World Screwworm before we roll into some updates and other reports from additional folks who are in the know. Ellen, can you confirm that you can see my screen?
I cannot see the screen.
Okay.
Oh, here we go.
Okay, great.
Now I can. That's great.
So I wanted to give you the bottom line up front. Basically, the sky is not falling yet. The issue that we're facing is that after being eradicated from the United States and Central America, screwworm has begun to move back north from Panama. At the end of 2022, 2023, it's now reached southern Mexico, which is about 700 miles away from the US border. So the screwworm can travel over 100 miles on its own in search of hosts, and then we can also move it by moving animals such as livestock. The folks that really need to know are the field personnel in the southern border states as a first line of defense. So the people in California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas should be on alert for screwworm as it gets closer. And for now, to a lesser extent, for those in the southeastern states, and I just mentioned that because the southeastern states can also support screwworm being a warmer and more humid climate. All of this status may change quickly. For the last 3 weeks, it's been rather still in southern Mexico. So we're hoping that many of the activities that are taking place by USDA and Mexican officials are working at the moment. So we'll keep our fingers crossed, but would like to just be prepared if necessary on the wildlife side. So your swift actions really do matter, and early detection and reporting can help stop outbreaks from spreading and help them stop them from getting worse. We had a major fail with the screwworm outbreak in the Florida Keys in that it was not reported to authorities for at least 2 or 3 months. And so that really put us behind in terms of our response. If you suspect screwworm, contact your state animal health official, also known as SAHO, and the USDA area veterinarian in charge, or AVIC, for your location. And this is not a legal requirement, but something that I recommend to everyone is to also contact the State Wildlife Management Agency disease expert if there is one for the state you're in. The audience today, hopefully, is primarily full of State Wildlife Management Agency disease experts. So for you guys, you want to work closely with your AVIC and your SAHO. We'll also give you a brief warning that parts of this presentation do contain graphic photos of infested key deer, and I will let you know when those are just about to come so that if you're squeamish, you can turn away. So we'll just go over what screwworm is, how to recognize it, how to report it, how to limit spread, and a few things for us in the wildlife conservation community to think about. New World Screwworm, if you haven't heard about it before, is a parasitic fly whose larvae infest the wounds of living warm-blooded animals, and they cause severe tissue damage and potentially death if untreated. The female screwworm flies lay their eggs in or at the edges of open wounds. And the key here is that these larvae eat the healthy living tissue of warm-blooded animals. So most fly larvae that we think of that may infest an animal will consume unhealthy or dead tissue, whereas for screwworm, they're eating the healthy tissue. Once flies lay eggs in a wound, then more flies are attracted to the smell that's being created, and they lay more eggs and develop more maggots, and that makes the wounds bigger and deeper. New World screwworm, and there is an Old World screwworm. For New World screwworm, it is endemic to the areas in the shaded parts of the map. And you'll notice that the southern United States is included there. And there are reports from the 1500s in Central America of native infestations of screwworm at that time. So it's probably been around for thousands of years, like the Old World screwworm. Here's the life cycle of New World screwworm, and you don't really need to pay attention to the small text there, but the take home is just that it's about a 24-day life cycle if the conditions are right, warm and moist. If the conditions are a little bit cooler, it may take longer than that. You'll see that there are 3 different instars for the larvae, and the third instar is the one that you'll probably recognize. The first instar is pretty hard to see with the naked eye. You can see the second instars, but those third instars really do stand out. There's a high animal health and economic importance to screwworm, and that's why there's been such an effort in the past to eradicate it from the United States and other parts of the world. As part of that management approach to limit economic impact, many of the producers changed their management strategies, or at least the timing of their management strategies, for periods of the year when the fly is not as abundant. So during the winter period when it's cooler. There are also natural cycles that can influence the infestation of animals, especially wild animals, such as when they're in the rut, when they're shedding their antlers, when they are giving birth. The umbilicus of the newborn is especially susceptible, as well as the vulva of the cow if there's any trauma during delivery. This is the map of when eradication took place in the United States and then down all the way to Panama. So there was a general movement from the southeastern United States pushing it out of that region, then out of the Southwest through Mexico, down Central America into Panama. And what we're seeing recently is a movement back up from Panama through Central America and back towards the United States. So that's why there's an emphasis on it at the moment, because it doesn't seem to be under control. At least it hasn't been in the past couple of years. Hopefully, the level of effort that's being put into it at the moment might keep it in southern Mexico. We'll see how that goes. So all along, there have been 6 countries in the Caribbean that have been endemically infested, and that is probably how we ended up with it in the Florida Keys. We don't know for sure that it came from Cuba, but that is only about 60 to 70 miles away from where the key deer were infested. So those countries are listed on the right. And South America has remained infested all along. So I'll walk through how to recognize the infestation in animals, and then we'll talk about some of the things to look for in pictures. So I'll give you a shout when we're about to look at those pictures. So the clinical signs include an irritated or depressed behavior. The animals may try and get away both from humans and other animals and hide in unusual places. We found many key deer inside buildings. They may be shaking their heads if they have an infestation around their head. And you may see open wounds with a serosanguinous discharge. Some of the wounds may be big and swollen and may look really horrible, and then some of them may just be a small hole filled with grayish material, and the maggots have created a cavern under the skin. Those third stage instars can vary in size and color from cream color to gray to yellow, even to a pink color. So that can be variable. Most, but not all of the wounds will have one or more bright white areas on the edge of the wounds, and those are the screwworm egg mass. And those bright white egg masses were quite useful for us with the key deer in identifying wounds that were most likely screwworms. So something that you could see from afar with a pair of binoculars or even with the naked eye. The bigger the wound, as I mentioned, the more maggots, and they produce a very characteristic smell that once you've smelled it, you are unlikely to forget. Screwworm can also infest mucous membranes, ears, eyes, nose, mouth, external reproductive tissues, umbilical cord, as I mentioned. So if you are examining an animal, you certainly want to check all those areas. In horses that are being imported into Florida, they always make sure to check in stallions the prepuce, because that's a common place that maggots could be found in an infested horse. So just a little bit of natural history for the fly larvae and an aid for you if somebody's calling from the field saying that they think they have an infested animal that they would like for you to examine. And so the first is that if you have a live animal with larvae feeding on live healthy tissue, then that is exactly what screwworm larvae like to do. So that would be something that you would definitely want to investigate. There are other types of fly larvae that can cause myiasis in live animals, but they're not actually feeding on the healthy living tissue. So in this case, you have a live animal, but you have larvae feeding on dead and necrotic tissue, and that can be difficult to distinguish in the field what's going on. We certainly had infestations of screwworm that then other fly species had laid eggs on, and we had the screwworm feeding on the live tissue and the other species of larvae feeding on the dead tissue. So those can be quite difficult as well. So I would include those in your I'm very suspicious category and make sure to follow up on those. And then lastly, there are species of fly larvae that only feed on dead animals. So you've got a dead animal and the larvae are feeding on dead tissue. So those are the cases that you would not want to send forward for diagnoses. And if it does get closer to the United States, and if it does cross into the United States, then I'm sure the labs will be flooded with specimens for identification. So on our end, we want to limit sending them cases that really should not be suspect and focus on those that are living animals that are infested or animals that were seen infested when they were alive and then were recently euthanized. Okay, so I'll move on to a couple graphic slides. So turn away if you're eating your lunch. Just to orient you, this is the head of a key deer. On the bottom left is the nose. Above the little green space that says adult fly is actually the right eye of the animal. To the right is a cream colored orbit that is the skull that's been exposed. And then on the right side of the picture, you've got the animal's left ear and left antler. You'll see the side of one maggot. For the most part, the maggots are embedded, where you can see it says tails of numerous maggots. They're actually all head down, chewing on live tissue, one next to another. So it almost gives you a pebble road type appearance. And you can see the egg mass there on the skull, as well as a female fly hanging out on the skull too. These are a few more presentations that we saw in the key deer. Oftentimes they'll have injuries to their feet because of the lime rock down in the keys. And so we would see infestations between the claws. You can see quite clearly on that picture on the top left, as well as the one on the top right, those white egg masses. The one on the bottom is the vulva of a doe that had given birth recently, and that has been infested as well. And then on the right, there's a picture of a typical multi-cavern or pocketed lesion with thousands of screwworm larvae that are burrowed into the tissue. So how are we going to report it? I included on the left here cases in humans because they can infest humans as well. And so you may have people in the field that are asking you about safety for themselves as well as the wildlife that they're working on. If they do suspect that they may have screwworm, then certainly those need to be referred to the local or state health department. For screwworm cases in animals, mostly wildlife for this group, but you may have domestic animals on wildlands as well, or working animals that you want to keep an eye on. We ask that you take a close-up photo of the wound with the maggots. Often that presentation is unique, and people that are familiar with cases in of screwworm in wildlife will be able to differentiate whether that's a New World screwworm case or not. You may then be asked to collect several maggots of different sizes and appearance using forceps. And you want to get those especially from deep in the wound, because I mentioned that other fly species may also lay their eggs in the wound. So we want to go deep into the wound where the maggots are feeding on live tissue and make sure that we are targeting the screwworm larvae. And place those in a leak-proof container with 70% or greater alcohol. That can be either ethyl alcohol or isopropyl alcohol. You then want to contact your state animal health official and your AVIC and discuss with them what you've seen, what you think it might be that you are suspecting that it could be screwworm. And they will probably want to have a look at the pictures and walk through that with you. And then if they feel like it's warranted, they may ask you to then submit specimens of the screwworm larvae to the National Veterinary Services Lab. And that requires a parasite submission form, and the SAHO or the AVIC will provide you with an FAD number to fill into block 31, which is the history of or additional information block. That's where you'll put that FAD number, and that just helps them track all of the information. So there are other labs that may be able to start providing preliminary diagnostics. And so I'm hoping that some of the wildlife labs are going to be able to assist, especially if NVSL begins to get overloaded. I'm not sure where that stands at the moment in terms of conversations between NVSL and the wildlife disease labs, but hopefully if we do have an introduction and NVSL does feel like it's being overwhelmed, that they'll be able to reach out to wildlife health labs as well as the non-labs. And diagnosis can be achieved through keying out the larvae and the flies. It can also be detected or distinguished from other species using PCR of the larvae with a restriction fragment length polymorphism. How do we limit the spread? It's a multi-pronged approach with animal and fly surveillance, both active and passive, stopping the movement of domestic animals, performing sterile fly releases, treating with antiparasitics, either domestic animals. We also did it in the key deer, and that can provide prevention as well as treatment. Incineration of affected carcasses is important so that the screwworm larvae aren't able to drop to the soil and pupate and then complete their life cycle, as well as wound treatment for infested animals. So unlike other foreign animal diseases of viral origin, this one can be treated in wildlife species as well as domestic species. So that's something to keep in mind. So the treatment options that we used in the key deer was manual removal of larvae and treatment of the wound. If we had an animal that we felt was at a clinical stage, that we could reverse it. You saw some pictures earlier where obviously we did euthanize those animals, and that was because we felt that clinically we could not treat those cases successfully. We also administered doramectin to kill any attached larvae and prevent additional infestations in the near term, meaning months after administration. And in the bottom right, you see someone feeding a deer a bait that has been soaked in doramectin. We also used pastries like donut holes, which were much better at absorbing the drug, and the key deer liked them a lot better than vegetables. So there was also administration in more wild areas. In the middle right picture, you'll see a deer at a feeding station. The feed itself does not have doramectin on it, but those paint rollers are soaked in it so that they're applying it to their chest. So they're getting a transdermal administration of the drug. I mentioned irradiation. That's one of the key components of the multi-prong approach, and that produces sterile male flies that are released. The reason that works is that the females only mate once, and so if those sterile male flies mate with them, then the eggs don't hatch. So it takes a little while, but it can be very effective. So I have a few things for us to think about as wildlife health experts, and that's the potential impacts to conservation, missions and visions of our respective agencies. One is the screwworm itself and what that might be able to do to populations' health, welfare. As an example, up to 80% of the white-tailed deer fawns back in the 50s were killed by screwworm infestations in bad years because of that umbilical infestation. And then in the 30s, Lindquist documented infestation of a number of species that were impacted by those infestations. And if you look at the data after the control efforts took place, then we had a population explosion. So there was obviously some impact to wildlife populations as a result of unabated screwworm. And then with the control efforts themselves, they may have impacts to conservation in terms of not allowing some inherent resistance to build up. Because we have not had screwworm in the United States for so long, I'm not sure whether there is any inherent resistance left in our wildlife populations or any of the domestic cattle populations that may have been a little more resistant than others. There's also the environmental impacts on invertebrates, especially from drugs like doramectin, that can be really harmful for aquatic environments. And something else to think about are the wildlife species that may be impacted and serve as host, and whether we have those species on our wildlife properties along the southern states. Which species may be at risk? Do we need to pay special attention to them in terms of either preventing or treating screwworm in those populations? I've been looking at some of the species that are crossing the border. The USDA is quite concerned about the role that wildlife populations may play in the movement of screwworm. So it would be good for us to have an eye on many of these populations. And then there's the non-native and domestic species on wild lands that may play a role as well, including nilgai in South Texas, which is a pretty large bodied animal and could support a lot of screwworm larvae, as well as feral pigs, burros, horses, and any domestic cattle or horses that we may have on our properties. So that's it for me, and I want to turn it over to Jenny and see if she has any other comments that she'd like to make.
Thanks, Sam. I just wanted to point out that I threw a couple of resources into the chat for anybody who wants a quick link to your SAHO or your ABIC, as well as the USDA New World Screwworm resource site. And they have a new module for accredited veterinarians that specifically covers screwworm. It's very easy and quick, so highly recommend it. And then just to point out that Sam and I and Camille Hopkins are essentially the technical contacts within the Department of the Interior. And from a federal perspective, US government perspective, we represent the wildlife health aspects of New World Screwworm. So if there are any messages that you want to get carried up to the federal level, feel free to reach out to any of the three of us. That's it.
Great, thank you. And we do have Jason with us today to give us an insight from USDA APHIS Wildlife Services. Take it away, Jason.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate it. Great presentation. It overlaps with a number of things that I want to highlight. It's great to see so many people, so many names on here that I know. I'm going to start out by saying that for USDA on the wildlife side, I'm the POC. Sam and I have been working together on the New World Screwworm topic for the last month or so, and we meet regularly to inform each other. When it comes to the wildlife aspect for USDA, there isn't a whole lot put in print right now as for planning. The big reason why is because we're going to be relying on our federal partners and our state partners, AFWA, in some of the thoughts and considerations. I want to rattle through some of the thoughts and considerations that we're thinking about now, and that we'll be reaching out to some of you individually on this call to talk further about before we put it on pen to paper and we can push it up for approval by the Secretary's office. I think everybody's aware on the USDA side, the sensitivity around this, especially with shutting down the borders and import-export, the history of the screwworm being in the United States and the economic impact to the livestock industry. It was pretty significant. Obviously, with increased costs, it would be even more devastating nowadays, especially with how cattle's moved about the country, not only within the United States, but with other countries. So this is a big issue, and wildlife do play a component to it that's fairly significant, as Sam was going through. So I want to hit on a couple of highlights that we are considering. And again, none of this is official, and we want to work with our state and federal partners to see what makes sense, what doesn't, and then work towards the best and most efficient approach as we go forward. So just going through these randomly in no particular order. One of the things that we see with wildlife is that it could be a really, really important surveillance aspect because, as Sam stated, it affects all warm-blooded animals, mammals, and birds alike. And we want to learn more about that. One of the biggest things that we're thinking about is how to most efficiently utilize a citizen science type approach. And we're interested in developing publications with contact information and leveraging an app during the SARS timeframe. I think many of you are aware of the SARS in whitetail and mule deer, and there was some progress made in developing an app for reporting. And we want to leverage that a little bit further and see if we can't further develop that for the public to report what they see that could possibly be screwworm on wildlife. So some of the target audiences, and this isn't going to be any surprise to this group of people, hunters, that's primarily during hunting season, hunt clubs, hunting facilities. Dr. Reed, I see you're on here. Texas is the big state for concern of entry. We have a lot of hunt facilities in Texas where they manage their animals fairly closely. They see their animals frequently. They have eyes on them. Great surveillance technique. Taxidermists, for when they're seeing things that are out of the ordinary. Bird banders, to reach out to bird banders just as they're handling birds. Are they seeing any lesions or anything different since there is record of birds having New World screwworm? Wildlife researchers in targeted areas, in those southern states that Sam listed on one of those screens. Another aspect that we want to leverage for messaging is that in the United States, there's a tremendous use of trail cams. And as Sam was showing some of the pictures, it's pretty obvious when some of those animals are highly infected with New World screwworm. And with the quality of some of the cameras, we could get a pretty good gauge if it's probable, if some of these wildlife species are becoming a host of New World screwworm. And that has to do with, researchers, hunters, and even a lot of landowners nowadays put trail cameras out just to see what's going around on their property, to have them report pictures of suspicious lesions on wildlife. Where we could leverage that is in a couple of different aspects. Again, as a surveillance tool, things have changed on the landscape since the 50s. Sam listed some of the species that we've known that have had screwworm in the past in the United States, but we have a lot more white-tailed deer on the landscape. We have a lot more feral swine on the landscape. Leveraging cameras will help us determine if it moves north. Are there certain species that are showing up on trail cams, for example, that would be better to target for surveillance, to look more closely at? And we don't know until the data comes in, if we ever get to that point. Another thought in regards to using wildlife as a surveillance layer for what's going on is to look at it in two different aspects. One is confirmed, meaning that we have an animal in hand, we've positively identified it. Another, going back to trail camera, is to have another layer of it's probable, where somebody that has a level of expertise in identifying screwworm, and you look at a picture and saying, well, I don't have the animal in hand, but that is probable that it is. By creating those extra layers will help us with where it's at, the species that are most likely to get it, and there's a certain level as to where that matters. Just going to give you a really quick example. I was with the USDA team a couple of weeks ago that was in Mexico City visiting with the agriculture folks and the wildlife folks. I saw a video of a mountain lion from a trail cam that was probable with screwworm. And I asked the Mexican officials if they recorded that on their map, and they said they did not, because Seneca, who's the Department of Agriculture, did not confirm it. Now, to me, and I think most of you on here, and this goes back again to one of Sam's slides, is that mountain lions, it so happens to be that lion that is probable was in an area that we know that is infested with New World screwworm. Now, if that was on the northern edge of the line of where the last known case of New World screwworm could be found, there's a whole lot to think about right there, because all of you know that mountain lions are highly mobile. In a week's time, they could move 100 miles. That's pretty significant as they're dropping larvae and pupae along the way for possibly extending where New World screwworm could go to. So along those lines, that's the species that we're most interested in, is the highly mobile species, the mountain lions, the jaguars, the feral swine, the various cervid species that we know that that can go great distances and could be moving that for carrying it. Let me see. So something else that we know that's already taking place that Sam didn't mention is the import and export of wildlife. Know that is occurring, going in and out of our various ports. The Fish and Wildlife Service does that. There's other inspectors that do that at our various ports. They do visual inspections of wildlife, but this is a great opportunity to remind our inspectors to look a little bit more closely for abnormal lesions that are coming from Central America and from Mexico in the area that is currently infected as they move forward. So one of the things that Wildlife Services is preparing to do is that we have staff on those southern states that are involved in various wildlife damage management removal activities, whether it's feral swine or other animals. We are in the process of putting together, coming up with the funding, and then we're going to put together collection kits. And Sam was describing on how to send samples in. We want our field staff that are regularly handling wildlife to have those collection kits readily available so that they can send them in. So we're in the process of setting up to purchase and provide those to our staff so that they can have it in their vehicles if they see anything suspicious. That they can send in immediately. So that's one thing that we're going to be doing. We're talking about how to provide assistance if we're going to increase the trapping level, the fly trapping level, to assist in monitoring the fly trapping. And then also we have a Wildlife Services Nuln lab, and we're in the process of working with NBSL on how to provide support if need be as things further develop. So those are a couple of things specific to Wildlife Services as well. As the USDA Wildlife Services POC for New World Screwworm, I can't emphasize enough about how important it'll be to collaborate with our state and federal partners as we put more pen to paper as to exactly what we're going to do, and to get your input so that we can have consistent message and reporting as the surveillance activities will begin if the screwworm continues to go more north. I will make a quick side comment in regards to my visit to Mexico City a couple of weeks ago and visiting with the agriculture and the wildlife officials. The agricultural officials, since it was detected in November of 2024, they've been doing a lot. They've got a lot of great messaging for the agricultural folks. The wildlife people are a little bit behind on their publications and their messaging, but they are rapidly catching up. They're working, the wildlife folks and the agriculture folks are working closely together to develop their messaging and to also leverage wildlife as a surveillance tool. A little bit of a nuance that they have that I'm glad that we don't have in the United States. Right now, where New World Screwworm is being found happens to be an overlap of the habitat of vampire bats. Vampire bats, because of their biology and their feeding behaviors, create an easy lesion and easy access for the New World Screwworm to the female fly to deposit the larva. And that could exacerbate some of the issues and is even more of a reason to monitor more where that vampire bat habitat is, because we have pictures of vampire bats feeding on feral swine, for example. So they've got an interesting dynamic that they should be leveraging for wildlife as their tool. So kind of rapid fire. Again, most of this is thoughts, considerations. But I wanted to share with you where we're at. If towards the end there's questions, I'll be happy to answer, but we look forward to working with you all and hearing some of your thoughts on how we can partner, work together, share messaging, share resources, if this continues to further advance. Hopefully it doesn't, but we'll wait and see. So that's it, Sam.
Thanks, Jason. All right, let's move on to Sarah. There she is. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for inviting me today to join you and to share our veterinary services perspective on New World Screwworm, particularly in livestock. So as Sam mentioned, this is a foreign animal disease. So I do want to emphasize that, that it is a foreign animal disease and it is reportable to the state animal health official and the VS area veterinarian in charge. And I saw it looked like Jenny dropped some links to those contacts in the chat. So thank you for doing that. And then Sam also alluded to the economic impact. So this is really an economically devastating pest for the agricultural industry. We in veterinary services recently conducted an economic analysis using a 1976 New World Screwworm outbreak in Texas. Looked at the size of that outbreak, adjusted it for inflation, and estimated that roughly an outbreak of that same scale today would cost Texas producers $732 million per year, and the Texas economy a loss of $1.8 billion. Additionally, Sam mentioned the New World Screwworm and some of the things that go into eradication with the sterile fly technique. So it's estimated that if it were reintroduced into the US, it could cost $1.27 billion to eradicate it again. So those are some big numbers, and that's definitely why we want to keep it out or be ready to respond immediately if it gets here. So leaders from across APHIS are working on our international engagement efforts with Mexico. So Jason kind of already alluded to that, just specifically with relation to the sterile fly dispersal efforts in Mexico. We have shifted those to the northernmost point of the outbreak in an effort to stop any further northern spread. So kind of going to the north and trying to push it back down and away from the US is the current goal. APHIS does maintain in partnership with, or USDA, sorry, does maintain in partnership with the Panama Ministry of Agriculture, the COPEG, or Commission for the Eradication and Prevention of Screwworm facility in Panama. That is the only New World Screwworm pupae sterilization facility in North America. And they're currently operating at their maximum capacity, producing 100 million sterile fly insects per week for that release effort. Domestically, veterinary services, from the APHIS perspective at least, is leading our preparedness and response planning for livestock in coordination with our sister program, Wildlife Services, for the wildlife perspective. So our approach to eradication is three-pronged, and Sam kind of alluded to this already, but I think it's good to hear things more than once. First, robust active field surveillance and education and outreach to ensure early identification, prevention, and treatment. As she mentioned, this is a treatable animal or a treatable disease in animals, so it's not the normal foreign animal disease response where we just come in and cull all the animals. We really only expect culling would be for welfare purposes. The next step of that three-pronged approach is controlling livestock movement to limit spread. Obviously, that's a little bit of a more challenge from the wildlife perspective, but from livestock, we do expect some quarantines and movement restrictions. And then finally, the sustained sterile insect dispersal. So talked about that plant is producing the maximum number of flies, and we would definitely leverage that if it came into the US. We are working for increased surveillance and contingency planning with our southern and southeastern US state partners. On the agricultural side, I'm sure that's also happening on the wildlife side. I'm just not hearing those conversations, but definitely close collaboration with our state partners, particularly in those southern tier states, to make sure that they are ready to go with their surveillance and contingency plans. Primarily, visual inspection of animals is our primary surveillance tool. So that includes active surveillance, which in the case of livestock is working with livestock owners and producers, veterinarians, to examine their livestock, particularly in areas that I mentioned might be under quarantine. And then just outreach with everyone, right, to get that passive animal surveillance. So that definitely includes all of your stakeholders, as well as, again, producers, veterinarians, pet owners, and the general community. Because again, the earlier we detect this, the quicker we can get on it and hopefully limit the size of the infestation and push it back out of the United States. So we already have a lot of these outreach efforts underway, and I saw that our website link was already posted in the chat as well, and there are a lot of outreach resources available on that website. You're welcome to use any of them and modify them to meet your needs for your stakeholders. I also kind of wanted to touch on two of the epidemiological principles that kind of form the foundation of our control and eradication plan, at least from the livestock perspective. So first is preventing contact between the New World screwworm flies and non-infested animals. That includes the prevention, monitoring wounds, like Sam mentioned, doing dehorning and other things at times of year where the fly might not be as active. Detection, early education, and early monitoring of any wounds, and then treatment of wounds. Again, it is a treatable condition if it doesn't progress too far. Again, as I mentioned, quarantine and treatment of infested livestock, movement controls, and inspection of livestock in regulatory control areas will be important. And then working with our wildlife partners to monitor and manage the wildlife in affected areas, because we know we can't exactly put a quarantine on wildlife species, but we can certainly work with you all to help manage the wildlife in those areas. And then again, stopping the production of New World screwworm flies through, again, treating infested animals, so stopping their life cycle on infested animals, and then using that sterile insect technique to eradicate the fly. And I think I just want to mention that this is really a One Health problem. You probably all already know that, but it really has the animal health perspective, both our domestic and wildlife species. It affects humans as well, not as commonly, but can affect humans. And then of course we have the fly and all the environmental conditions that make it conducive for that fly to establish population. So it's a really challenging One Health problem, but it's really important that we collaborate closely with all of our partners so that while we in veterinary services have regulatory authority over the agricultural species, we are closely collaborating not only with our sister program in wildlife services, but our state, federal, local officials from agriculture, wildlife, human health, public health partners to make sure that the most appropriate response can be approached holistically through that One Health perspective. So again, from our perspective, outreach is really key, making sure we're providing timely information to local livestock owners, producers, veterinarians, physicians, hunters. Jason had a really great list of all of the wildlife stakeholders that really probably need to be aware of this issue, pet owners, and anybody in the general community. And again, we do have a lot of outreach materials on our website, so please take a minute to take a look at that. And then the only other thing I think I wanted to mention is that we just earlier this week published our updated veterinary services foreign animal disease preparedness disease response strategy for New World screwworm. I can drop a link to that in the chat if someone hasn't beat me to it yet. That is a veterinary services perspective, so it touches very briefly and pretty superficially on wildlife. But it can give you a perspective of how VS is planning to approach New World screwworm, our response, and we definitely will be working with wildlife services to put out some more detailed and more operational guidance in the future. But I think that is probably all I have for now. Happy to look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. And I meant to ask for the folks that are making presentations, if you could put your email address in the chat so that if people have questions later down the line, they can reach out to us. All right, Mark Cunningham and Peter Sebastian from Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
Hey, Sam. Yeah, thanks for putting this together. You and Ellen and Jason, really appreciate it. I think it's a great idea, and I'm glad to be involved. My camera's not working, so I'm going to just jump to the share screen. Let me know if you can see that now.
Yep, it's up.
Awesome. Okay, and hopefully I'm able to advance it. But yeah, again, my name's Mark Cunningham. I'm the Fish and Wildlife Health subsection leader for Florida Fish and Wildlife. And we were able to be involved in the screwworm response back in 2016. So we it's just going to kind of add to some of the things Sam had mentioned. We were there really in a supportive role, collaborating with Florida Department of Agriculture, Fish and Wildlife Service, USDA, and a number of local government folks as well. So our role was part of a task force within the Incident Command system, and we were there really to assist the Fish and Wildlife Service. So their law enforcement, and Sam Gibbs, their veterinarian. And so we were, from that perspective, we were focused on decreasing screwworm fly numbers, or helping them to do so, and that was done through capture and immobilization and treatment of deer that were less severely infested, but then also euthanasia of severely affected cases. And then at the same time, we were working with, doing surveillance on the mainland, doing outreach. I know Jason mentioned remote cameras, and we were engaging with hunters, getting photos like the one on the upper right there of possible cases, and trying to follow up on those. We're also doing necropsies for anything that had lesions suspicious of New World screwworm or fly larvae or anything like that. So trying to do active outreach and surveillance, and then working with Department of Ag and USDA to get that information out there to wildlife rehabbers and hunters and other stakeholders. So just to add, and I should have done the disclaimer at the beginning. Hopefully Sam's disclaimer still covers this presentation, but I almost never give a presentation without photos that some might not find appealing. But as Sam mentioned, some of these lesions were pretty severe. So just adding to what she presented. So this one at the top there, looking down on the crown, those are all the posterior ends of hundreds, if not possibly thousands of larvae in there. And she mentioned this, it's important to remember that not all these lesions were this severe. This was kind of a unique situation where, as was mentioned, the diagnosis went, it was missed for several fly generations, 3 or 4, so several months. And so the fly numbers down there with such a dense host population really exploded and resulted in pretty severe lesions. But some of them weren't always severe. So if you look at the lower right there, externally, a lot of times they did not appear too bad. And this is another example of relatively small diameter wound there, which from a distance or even a remote camera might not be super obvious. But you can see the discharge all around the lesion there. And what you don't appreciate, of course, is the odor, pretty foul. But there's almost always a discharge. And it's one of the things I found interesting and learned from was just how inflamed and thick these lesions were, as opposed to lesions that are composed of just necrotic tissue with secondary screwworm or some other native blowfly. So these were really thickened. You can see how deep that cavity is with the screwworm larvae deep down in there. And then, slicing it, across, it was a deep, they're characterized by deep cavitated lesions. So again, don't be misled by that relatively small superficial lesion, which you see it initially. They can be pretty deep down there and pretty thick. And again, that's opposed to necrotic tissue, which you can't really miss, but it doesn't have that inflammation, doesn't have that cavitation. So that was one of the things that I appreciated from being involved. The other concern was just biosecurity, and We had a lot of assistance from USDA Wildlife Services, and one of their health biologists took this photo of a New World screwworm fly in his pickup truck. And, we were going back and forth from Gainesville to the Keys, working on this project. And so that helped, kind of send home the message to me anyway, that there's the risk of pretty easily spreading this outside of the initial area if strict biosecurity measures aren't taken. So and that's even with it being in the Florida Keys, which is geographically isolated, a little bit more difficult for the fly to get out of. So things that we're going to be looking at in preparation here on the mainland is movement of harvested carcasses, movement of wildlife, or rehabbed wildlife, and of course taxidermists and processors, part of the hunter harvested carcass movement. So being on the lookout for that. And as part of that, we have a hotline that we're monitoring 365 days a year. So we get calls fairly often. This is kind of hard to tell there, but a squirrel with lesions and fly eggs. You can see these are not characteristic of New World screwworm, but we're soliciting these kind of reports actively to follow up on. Similarly, the deer on the bottom with lesions suggestive of screwworm, but on closer examination, they're not. So we're doing that active outreach and surveillance, reaching out to hunters, rehabbers, taxidermists, and processors. We need to increase our effort as the hunting season gets closer. We're also trying to, and this is already in place with chronic wasting disease surveillance, but having biologists have access to large carcass bags in which you can completely seal the carcass in and any fly larvae that might escape. So getting those sealed up and frozen and delivered to us for necropsy. And some things we need to do: update our website, get ready for the upcoming hunting season, and improve our reporting system. So we have a hotline, but we don't have an online app for reporting. So trying to bring that all together into a single reporting mechanism is one of our future goals. So thanks, and that's all I had.
Thank you so much, Mark. Diane, we're getting all kinds of perspectives. I hope you're enjoying. And Mark added a lot of cool stuff to what I had presented earlier. And Diane was there as well, so she can give you the state ag perspective from the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Thanks, Diane. I can see your slides.
Yeah, just checking the slide. Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
As far as that goes, yes. And some of this is going to be duplication, and I'll try and just quickly go over if there's anything that is duplication in doing this, if I can get my slides to start working. And Sam did an excellent job already of covering some of the real impact that will occur related to the detection of New World screwworm in the United States, and how that's needs to be considered now and also moving forward. And so as far as FDACS's role, similar to some of the other things that have been discussed, we have already begun outreach. And these QR codes actually are QR codes that get to something that's important as far as that goes related to it. Our outreach, as far as that, is our state New World screwworm site. We do help facilitate the submission of larvae to NBSL, whether it's from practitioners, producers, FWC. Mark and I work together fairly regularly on submission of a number of things. And so doing that, should there be a detection, there would, of course, be an incident management team established, just like there was in the event in the Keys. And each of us would then serve our own roles within that. And I think it's we serve in those roles for other events other than just animal disease. So that's kind of a practiced activity. Regulation of animal movement, of course, is something we would be heavily involved and engaged in. And that's for all animal movements, whatever they are. And of course, surveillance activities, which is kind of the heart of what we're already have been talking about and what we have initiated some of, but would certainly ramp up in the event of any detection. So our outreach and education has really been extensive at this point already and is just continuing to grow. Many audiences of stakeholders, as I said, our veterinarians in our state working with any of the entities that we get an opportunity to get in front of to make sure and get the message out. And I really appreciate getting the support of the key here is report, report, report. If nothing else, what needs to come out of this is report something that is suspicious. We'd far rather get 20, 50, 200, whatever, that are not New World screwworm than go through another incident where we miss out because somebody didn't report. So we just really want to coordinate doing that. And so that's why we work so closely with our veterinarians that are likely to be the ones seeing first cases, but certainly want to include other stakeholders. So we do have an online opportunity. That QR code there goes to that to be able to report suspicion of any reportable disease. Certainly, we want to ensure that they get treated. We certainly are including wildlife services in all of our discussion on that. And we'll be closely monitoring any movements and double checking on movements related to affected areas. We have already opened our website. The USDA website is similar, but is already there. Both have resources, and our website also links to the USDA website. Again, QR codes that are out there for getting to any of these websites, and we'll continue to expand on them as things change, trying to keep it current. It's been mentioned many times that movement controls are going to be part of the key to controlling this should there be a detection in the United States. So Florida is already involved in the working group with other state animal health officials and with USDA preparing and coordinating on and trying to come up with a standardization of the requirements so that it's not a patchwork of 50 different sets of requirements. There's pretty much been consensus at this point that there would be requirement for interstate movement, certainly of animals or out of affected areas or areas of concern, requirement for examination of animals and certification by an accredited veterinarian. That length of time is still being discussed, but likely to be no more than 5 days from exam to movement of the animal. And if there is a detection here where there's an affected area, whether that's a state, county, that there's all of that, there is also a pretty strong consensus for the requirement of treatment of all warm-blooded animals that are moving from that affected area with a 3-day hold prior to their actual movement. Now, obviously, wildlife don't know where the line is and are going to walk back and forth across it or sometimes run or various other things. But this is for anything that would be under human control, even wildlife, though, that are under any, such as the rehab animals and that sort of thing. So that would apply there. And we have a little experience with this. Some of you that were there will remember that we did have a checkpoint. The lucky thing in the Keys was that there was one road out and one road in. And even though it's a busy, popular place relative to what travel goes on nationally, otherwise it's a road less traveled, shall we say, but we did set up an interdiction station for checking animals leaving the Keys during the incident. Surveillance has all been mentioned a number of times, the gold standard here of surveillance is rotted liver. Oh, I forgot my explanation of that. If you don't like to see things that might gross you out, please. Mine are not, I don't have as many as previously. So, but this is the gold standard. We do surveillance, so in particular to determine distribution of flies early on, but then later on it is done as a mechanism by which we can determine how well the distribution of sterile flies is working, because the goal of the process of sterile insect technique is to get a 10-to-1 ratio of steriles to fertile wild type fertile flies, and so surveillance is going to be a key part of that. There have been some advances in surveillance opportunities. Instead of just having to have a trained person who know how flies fly, because there is a difference in the nature of how the flies fly into the liver that can help in the detection of which ones are New World screwworm. There is a lot of work going on some other passive trapping opportunities to occur. And this is certainly something that would be discussed in the event of a detection, is the opportunities to do some of this surveillance, as was discussed earlier, to engage wildlife services, because some of the habitats that are very good for these flies would be on lands that are under wildlife services activities. So we did have a little incident with a interject from a human that we did not find any viable flies or maggots here, but we had an infected person arrive in Jacksonville. And so we did set up corridors and surveillance areas and do a 20K around the landfill that received some material from this, and from the hospital that he was treated at, and the airport. And so this is just some pictures of those activities involved in utilizing these traps, and then looking at the flies are then killed and examined quickly. You can rule out a number of species that are not, and then we send for identification those flies that we think are of need further identification to an entomologist. It's been discussed, the sterile insect technique is the effective strategy that's used. It's considered a very environmentally friendly control for this pest. And so the pupa are irradiated with cobalt. There are a couple of different ways this dispersal, this has already been discussed. The fly dispersal can occur either by planes, or as we did in the Keys, where we did what are called ground releases, where the pupa themselves are hung in trees in suitable habitats so that they can then hatch out and join the regular population. Again, our real key and take-home messages at the moment is this outreach to realize that wildlife can play a major part, that we need to get our veterinarians engaged and any other stakeholders. Of course, as has been discussed, it is One Health. Physicians also could see cases, and failing to report and failing to detect early could be very, very costly, as was already mentioned. And I think that should do.
All right, thank you, Diane. I appreciate that. And I just wanted to clarify, when you said wildlife services, you mean wildlife management agencies in general, not
in
USDA
general.
wildlife?
It's not specific to. We work, of course, we work on a fairly daily basis, almost with FWC, with our state partner. But then we also work quite regularly with USDA's wildlife services. And, you know, I reach out to you. I'm sure you get annoyed, but I mean, pretty regularly. We're in communication. So, you know, we try and cover the gamut.
Perfect, thank you. And Diane makes a very good point that the outbreak in the Florida Keys, I don't even know how many agencies were involved. It was down to the Monroe County agency as well, or county commission. So it took a lot of people getting involved in that, and that was a really small, geographically contained outbreak. So it scares me to think what we'll be looking at if it comes across the border. Anyways, thank you so much, Diana, and we'll move on to Talani with the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society.
Okay, I'm coming in there. Yeah, I have a
There you are.
I have a big southern window, so I wear sunglasses because otherwise I'm like, in the sun all day. I'm not trying to be a Hollywood star to you guys. But greetings, and I see a lot of people that I know on the participant list. So I just wanted to tell you that from Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, we are very concerned about this. We have a number of tribes that are along the southern border. Probably our biggest tribe that we are working with in trying to do outreach and all of that is the Tohono Nation down in southern Arizona. They know that they have like a 65-mile corridor of, where they share the border with Mexico, and nobody else has jurisdiction. We don't have a wall there yet. We know that we've got a lot of feral animals that come back and forth. I was recently down there the 1st of May, and the tribe expressing that they know they've got a lot of animals that come back and forth and into the U.S., into their tribal lands, and then further get into the state of Arizona, get on state lands, get on private lands, get on other federal lands. So that has been a big thing is our just education. And I did want to just briefly tell you guys that we also have included, at least from my aspect here in New Mexico, Arizona, primarily. I don't do too much with our tribes in Texas, but we have incorporated, and I am in communications with Indian Health Service, because they are a component. Like we said, I was in Bolivia for 3 years back in the very early 2000s, 1999 to 2002. I've dealt with screwworm on a regular basis, trying to talk to cattlemen who don't want to vaccinate because that one injection site can bring in the screwworm. So everybody just needs to know that this is a real threat. I mean, and this is scary business. I've seen it. I have cut out lesions. I will tell you that my experience has been those larvae that are literally down in there, unlike normal myiasis, you can't scoop them out. Normal myiasis, you could take your finger or a scoop or something, kind of clean out that wound. You can't do this with these wounds. Those things are in there, they're in there tight. You've got to literally cut them out. And if you pop one of those larvae, I'm glad somebody mentioned about the smell. How we all as veterinarians, we know what parvo smells like. You pop one of those screwworm larvae, you will never forget that smell. It is a very distinctive smell, and you only have to smell it once, and then your brain always knows. So as far as from Native American Fish and Wildlife, we're just trying to do heavy education. We have the Southwestern Regional Conference coming up in August, and I'm going to do an entire seminar with them on that. Working, like I said, very closely with our Indian health partners. We're including our animal control officers. We have a lot of feral dogs, a lot of feral cats on tribal lands, especially southern New Mexico on the Mescalero Apache Reservation. Then you get over to Arizona, where our San Carlos Apache and White Mountain Apache, and like I said, I already mentioned Tohono, and our many other. We have, between New Mexico and Arizona, we have almost 60, probably Ann, I think Ann is on, but we have probably almost 60 reservations that we have to deal with. And so I work very closely with Ann Justice Allen over in Arizona and Ellen Crockett here in New Mexico, trying to just get that word out that we've got to be aware. And then the other thing that I'm going to say, having worked with APHIS Veterinary Services for a number of years, is just trying to remind our federal partners that when we get into contact zones, when we get into restriction boundaries and all of that big stuff, tribal lands are different. And so we have to be respectful of our tribal boundaries, and yet we also have to work together. And so that's, I think, where I come in a lot of times is just trying to educate and explain to federal agencies, and most of our state agencies are pretty respectful of those sovereign boundaries. I'd say that you know, just trying to get people to understand that we need to be respectful for our tribal nations. And yeah, things are going to work slower there. I'm handing out, you know, screwworm spray and trying to educate tribal producers about those wounds and doctoring them, and really looking at good animal care and reporting more than anything else. So we have a number of, you know, we've got over 300 tribal partners in Native American Fish and Wildlife Service, but we don't have membership from every single one, all 657. So we're just trying to do outreach as best as we can, and just trying to work and be that kind of that middle person that helps make sure that our tribal lands are covered, our tribal animals are covered, and that we come to the table, and our tribal agencies are just as important as your state and federal agencies. And so I would ask that in the future, when you guys do give presentations, that you do remind people that it's not just state and federal response, it's also going to be a tribal response, because our tribal partners are very, very big on this. So that's what I've got, and I'll put my contact into the chat. Thank you guys
Delaney.
for
I really
thinking of
appreciate
us.
that. Yeah. And it's not on the agenda, but Hunter Reed has just offered to give a brief update on where Texas is with their response. So if Hunter.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. We've obviously been pretty tied into this as well. Just briefly, our wildlife veterinarian staff, Sarah and I, have been working closely with Texas Animal Health Commission on this. We already have an established One Health working group between our department, Texas Animal Health Commission, USDA, and then Department of State Health Services. So we've really hammered out kind of what our reporting protocols are going to be. In addition, we've been hosting trainings between Texas Animal Health Commission and TPWD, not only for their staff, but then also with our game wardens, our wildlife biologists, in addition to our state parks folks. So we've created a suite of materials for our staff to reference, very easy, frequently asked questions in basic biology. But also trying to coordinate messaging. So as this is a foreign animal disease, trying to make sure that we're saying the same message as USDA and our more Texas Animal Health Commission focused messaging. So our communications folks are working with Texas Animal Health Commission and USDA to try and make sure that we're all in lockstep as we move forward. We have a variety of landowner trainings that are coming up, led by East Foundation, King Ranch as well. So those are on the horizon, in addition to the creation of an advisory group between TPWD and THC to coordinate response, as well as communication efforts. But I just wanted to provide some insight there.
Thanks, Hunter. All right, I just put in the chat to please feel free to put questions in the chat, or just turn your camera on and ask a question. And if I could get all of the speakers to turn their cameras on, please, that'd be great. That includes you, Mark and Jenny.
Yeah, my camera's not working. Sorry.
Oh, that's right. Okay, we'll give you a pass this time. No questions? No way.
Shane from Kansas has his hand up.
Yeah.
Thanks, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question for Diane. This is Shane in Kansas. Can you use other animal parts other than liver? Might save us some money. We wouldn't have to go buy livers if it comes this far north.
The subject matter expert has tried a number of different things, and it's worse than that. the frozen liver does not work as well as a fresh liver that's rotted to the right degree does. There's a real art to it, so to speak. I hate to say it that way, considering it's a rather stinky job, but anyway. And even utilizing species other than cattle is less rewarding. So unfortunately, no. There is a product called Swarm Lure that is produced that is used on some of the sticky traps and some other passive surveillance opportunities, but again, has not consistently been nearly as effective as the rotted liver is. We do work with a number of the slaughter plants in our state and get livers that have, for one reason or another, some reason or trimmings thereof, saved for us, and kind of keep a set of, at different stages, livers rotting for us to have as ongoing surveillance.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shane. All right, we have a question from Ginger. What does the disposal process look like? So for the key deer, we used incinerators to ensure that we were fully killing the larvae. You might have seen my note in the chat that when we froze them, just while we were stockpiling them for the incinerator, we noticed if we pulled them out in a fairly brief time period, that they weren't frozen solid and that they could thaw out and start wiggling away. So if you are going to freeze them to stockpile them for incineration, just make sure they are frozen. On a larger scale, I believe, and Sarah and Jason can help me out here. I think the stockpile, do you guys have some incinerators? I know you have walk-in freezers, which we borrowed for the key deer, but do you have incinerators on hand that we could share with states?
I believe so, but I don't know for sure. I know there are a lot of state regulations that govern whether or not incinerators can be used. So have to get back to you on that one unless Jason knows.
At one time, I knew that they had some portable incinerators, but I don't know if they still exist or not. So yeah, we would have to get back.
Okay, so that would be more ideal. Deep burial, of course, is an option for lots of different diseases, but in this case, since what those third instars really want to do when they're ready is go into the soil to pupate, then burial may not be the best option. Pauline asks, are the Southern Border State Wildlife Agencies willing to share their educational materials, flyers with other states? So at the moment, I think that would be Florida and Texas that mentioned having outreach materials, and Talani as well, perhaps.
Yeah, all of our stuff is available on our website. So and I'll be
Okay.
updating that. So yes.
Same for us. We have brochures that are actually the USDA brochures, but that have our contact information also added on to them. And then internally, we have letters to veterinarians and all, but those are specifically directed at how to get shipping labels, submission forms and stuff to contact us directly. It's more related to our contact information. But our website has some just generic brochures and that sort of thing on it. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and Sarah mentioned that there are a lot of materials on the USDA APHIS website, and that we can use those to do, as Diana's mentioning, make them more relevant to the individual state that we're in.
They specifically have a little box that's empty that's for you to put either your state on that USDA form. And so you can put state contacts, or in our case, we put a QR code as well as the phone number and the web link all into that little box, and then have printed them. So we've customized them to Florida.
And I'll just
Perfect.
add
Excellent.
quickly that we get a lot of requests for high resolution photos that folks can use in developing their own outreach materials. So we've been working with our legislative and public affairs to get a photo library up on the web. So once that's available, you'll be able to download and use those photos if you wanted to make your own outreach materials, just crediting, the source from the file. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks.
Hey,
I
Sam,
appreciate that. Yeah.
one thing to point out really quick, thanks to Hunter. And Sarah and I knew that this was coming, that Secretary Rollins from the USDA just did a big announcement today in Texas in regards to a plan to work towards combating New World screwworm. So thank you for Hunter for posting that press release in the chat.
Literally hot off the presses.
Literally.
And Chris Turner asks, what survival rates do you see in wildlife, particularly deer, with no intervention? As I mentioned very briefly, in the southern US in the 50s, they were looking at 40 to 80% mortality rate in fawns. But if you're asking survival rate in an infested animal, for the most part, those animals will die. How does time of year affect fly activity, infection rates, survival, prognosis, recovery? The time of year definitely affects the fly activity in northern climes where it's colder. That life cycle takes longer, or they are unable to live in temperatures, I think, below 45. They don't do much. I think they would survive that time period as a fly, but they're just not able to lay eggs and complete their life cycle under 45 degrees. But certainly humid and warm is their preferred environment. Jason.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that really quick, if you don't mind, Sam. So if we have a warm spring, that can be very problematic for wildlife because of the very reasons that you stated earlier, Sam, is it has to do with birthing of wildlife. The umbilical cord aspect and any injuries for when the females are giving birth are great opportunities for access for screwworm larvae to infect the host. So yeah, warm springs are not a good combination for wildlife.
Sam, I wanted to go back on that question about incinerators and disposal. And I know it's not just Indians. You're going to find this in a lot of rural communities. People read that. We've got to be very, very careful that they don't try to start, burning these carcasses themselves, because it's too much to call the feds or whatever. And so we don't need to, New Mexico and Arizona are in unprecedented drought, and we don't need to be starting a whole bunch of wildland fires because people think they've seen screwworm in a carcass or in a deer or somebody, and they start trying to dispose of it themselves, pouring gasoline on it and burning that carcass, and now we're burning all of our landscape up. So we've got to be really, really careful when we're talking to the public about incinerating these carcasses and these wounds, because we could really, really do a lot of damage there. And so and like I said, I know that's one thing that I do at our tribal meetings, is just try to explain to everybody, please don't try to take care of this yourself, with gasoline and a match. Yeah.
We have Fish and Wildlife Service, and I think Park Service is a bit similar, and I'd be interested to hear from the states on this. We tend on our properties to have bone pits. And so that was an issue with the key deer as well, because these deer were just being thrown onto the soil in a big pile, and the screwworms loved it. They thought that was perfect. And that also led to scavenging and the ability of other wildlife species to be attracted to an area where we had a lot of screwworm flies as well. So it was a pretty bad situation. So definitely the carcass disposal. I don't think I have good answers for you. And as Talani pointed out, even the best answer of incineration may create its own problems. We certainly struggled a bit with the EPA and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection because of air quality issues associated with burning. So lots of more things to talk about. I think we're at our time, are we, Ellen?
Yeah, I think we had said 2:30 was our
Yep.
was our end time.
Okay.
It seems like
Well,
we could talk about this all day.
I know. I could talk for a lot longer on this, but it's 2:34, so I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much to all the speakers and for the regional coordinators for putting this into action. And I will work with our group to see if we can get the slide presentations and the list of resources that was put in the chat into a package to send back out to the group. You have everybody's email addresses in the chat. And we will include that in the package as well. And hopefully, if you have any questions, you'll follow up with us. So thank you.
Do you want us to email our presentations to you or to Ellen?
Ellen, please.
Okay.
Thanks everyone
Thanks so much.
for being here today, and thank you to our presenters. Really excellent. A lot of good information.
Great. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.